All right, hello everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I'm going to be talking to you about the aging brain, a tale of two diseases here tonight. So, as the baby boomer generation gets older, we're facing a threat called the silver tsunami. Thanks to advances in medicine, people are living longer, and thanks to how expensive it is to have kids these days, less children are being born. So this combination means that our global population is aging rapidly. And this is a problem because despite our advances in medicine, older adults are still more likely to acquire certain diseases as their health declines. So this is the first of our two diseases here. Alzheimer's disease is one disease that's more likely to occur in older adults. So Alzheimer's disease is characterized by difficulty with words, unfounded emotions, difficulty solving problems, confusion with time or location, and of course, memory loss. So there are approximately 5 million people with Alzheimer's disease in the United States alone. And by 2050, this looming silver tsunami will cause that number to nearly triple. And the scariest thing about this is that there are almost no treatments for Alzheimer's disease. So thousands of scientists around the world have been dedicating their lives to finding treatments for Alzheimer's disease. And my lab is trying to find ways to treat this disease by focusing on one of the lesser known symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, which is seizures. So you may know that our brains function through electrical activity, but sometimes that electrical activity can go haywire, resulting in a seizure where your brain kind of crashes like a computer can, and you lose consciousness and sometimes even control of your limbs. Having multiple unprovoked seizures is when someone is diagnosed with epilepsy. And as it turns out, epilepsy and Alzheimer's disease are highly linked. And we can see this because those with Alzheimer's disease are about 10 times more likely to acquire epilepsy. Furthermore, seizures can worsen the cognitive impairments that we see in Alzheimer's disease. So this means that if we can treat seizures in people with Alzheimer's disease, then we may be able to slow the progression of the disease, leading to a longer lifespan and better quality of life. But there is a catch to this. There are some current anti-seizure medications that can worsen cognitive impairments. So if our goal is to treat seizures to improve Alzheimer's disease symptoms, we first need new medications that can better control seizures without having these bad side effects. But before we can do that, we need to understand what causes seizures and epilepsy in Alzheimer's disease. And so to address that, we really need to know what exactly is epilepsy. So epilepsy is defined as abnormal and excessive brain activity. So again, you probably know that neurons in our brain function through electrical activity. Neurons are cells that like to talk to each other, and they communicate by sending each other electrical signals, but sometimes they can talk too much, which is what leads to seizures and epilepsy. So to kind of conceptualize what's happening in the brains of people with epilepsy, we can think of the brain as like a large company. There are different departments in this company based on some of the primary functions of the brain, like memory formation, movement, vision, touch, and hearing. And each time we want to do one of these things, our neurons have a meeting. And just like in meetings we likely all have in our jobs, sometimes there can be too many people that are invited. Like, the entire company doesn't have to come to the meeting, right? We really only need the minimum group it takes to get the job done. And if all of our cells in the department are talking over each other at the same time, nothing is going to get done. So this is what happens when someone has a seizure. These neurons are just chatting away and not actually getting any work done. These seizures can manifest as a loss of consciousness, kind of losing control of your limbs, temporary confusion, staring spells, and even anxiety. So how do too many neurons get invited to the meeting? Well, there's this one cell that really wants to invite them. So that's this cell here, the pyramidal neuron. And what they're really good at is communicating. They're that person in the office that's kind of like a chatty Cathy who really loves to talk. And whenever a meeting needs to be scheduled, they're the ones who send out the invites. And they do this by releasing a chemical signal called glutamate. You can kind of think of glutamate as an email inviting other cells to the meeting. And these other cells have an inbox where they receive this email called a glutamate receptor. So the function of these pyramidal cells is to excite other cells and invite them to the meeting where they can all talk together. You can imagine that they might send out emails, like department-wide emails, that look something like this. Meeting happening now. Hey everyone, we just got some input from another brain region. Let's have a quick meeting about our response, and everyone is invited. So the pyramidal cell sends out invites to all of its fellow pyramidal cells to invite them to the meeting. And if it has its way, they'll all show up to participate. And remember, they like to talk, and they have a really hard time staying on task. So if they run the meeting by themselves, they'll just keep on talking, which results in too much electrical activity, which can trigger a seizure. But thankfully, our brain has other employees whose job it is to stop this excessive brain activity. One of these employees that can help keep the pyramidal neurons in check are these inner neurons here. So these inner neurons are also good at communicating, but they're sending out a different message. Whereas pyramidal cells want to invite everyone to the meeting, the inner neurons have to tell other cells that they're not allowed to come. So they do this by releasing a different neurotransmitter called GABA to a different inbox called a GABA receptor. What this does is inhibits other neurons as opposed to exciting them, so they're less likely to become active. So what this equates to in our office is an email that looks kind of like this. Please do not attend. Hello, you may have received an email from pyramidal neuron asking you to attend a meeting. This was sent in error. The meeting is for a select few individuals and your participation is not required. Thank you for your understanding. These cells kind of have to backtrack the pyramidal cell's invite and be like, just kidding, you actually aren't invited to the meeting. Please do not come. So thanks to the inner neurons, only the cells that have to attend the meeting come, and the meeting can actually be productive. These cells, again, work to decrease brain activity to counteract that action of the pyramidal cells. But there's also another key employee that people often forget about called astrocytes. So unlike these other two, astrocytes are not neurons, but they play a huge role in how they interact with each other. So astrocytes surround neurons where they send signals in this space called the synapse. And one of their main jobs is to vacuum up this extra glutamate using this glutamate transporter here in blue to stop cells from getting too excited. So in our office, you can think of these guys as secretaries who are responsible for making sure meetings stick to an agenda and end on time. So you can imagine they kind of send out emails sort of like this. Short meeting, hello everyone. Please take some time to attend a short meeting today. We want to be mindful of everyone's time, so please stick to the agenda attached below. So the neurons are all still invited to the meeting, but the astrocytes are reminding them that they really need to stay on task. So with their help, the pyramidal neurons are a little less excited and they won't trigger a seizure. So when the astrocytes and inner neurons work together, they can balance out the excitation from the pyramidal cells and will have a normal level of activity. But in epilepsy, this balance is skewed in favor of excitation. So either the pyramidal cells talk too loud or the inner neurons and astrocytes aren't as good at quieting them down. And there's a few reasons why this could happen. So anything that causes damage or alterations to the brain can cause seizures and epilepsy to occur. For example, brain injury like concussions that you can get from sports like football. Some genetic variations will result in seizures and epilepsy, and some infections that infiltrate the brain as well. So these are all capable of shifting the balance between excitation and inhibition, and triggering that abnormal and excessive brain activity that's characteristic of seizures and epilepsy. So what my research is focused on is how does Alzheimer's disease also shift this balance leading to seizures? So Alzheimer's disease and epilepsy have some similar risk factors. So the risk factors for Alzheimer's disease include lifestyle, kind of like exercise and eating habits, and again, certain genetic variants, as well as environmental factors like exposure to pollution. But I'm mostly focused on genetics. And in particular, I'm focused on this gene called PSEN2. So there are many genes associated with risk of Alzheimer's disease, but this is the one I'm most interested in for my research. So the PSEN2 gene produces a protein aptly named PSEN2, and variants in this gene that cause Alzheimer's disease typically lead to a loss of function of this PSEN2 protein. Around 1/3 of people with loss of function variants in this gene will develop both Alzheimer's disease and epilepsy. But we still really don't know why losing this protein causes seizures. So my research is focused on answering this question of how does loss of PSEN2 cause this shift in balance of excitation and inhibition that leads to epilepsy? And kind of as it turns out, what we know so far is that some of our brain office employees here are involved. So if we remember these glutamate receptors, the inbox is where our neurons get emails inviting them to our meeting. Pyramidal neurons, interneurons, and astrocytes all express glutamate receptors, and PSEN2 seems to help play a role in how many of these receptors there are and which cell types they're in. So in my research, I look at differences in the amount and location of glutamate receptors when PSEN2 is present and when it's gone. So, but these glutamate receptors are really, really small. And so in order to look at them, I use a technique called immunohistochemistry, which uses antibodies. So antibodies bind to a specific protein. In this case, they're binding to the glutamate receptor. And then I use another antibody that attaches onto this first one, but this one, importantly, lights up. So with this light up antibody, I can see the glutamate receptors, and that kind of looks something like this. So this is a pretty zoomed in image of the brain, and this C shape here in red is where a lot of our pyramidal cells, interneurons, and astrocytes like to hang out. And in red here, we can see their glutamate receptors. So this is what the glutamate receptors in the brain look like when PSEN2 is present, but when it's gone, there seems to be a lot less. So it seems that losing PSEN2 can alter the number of glutamate receptors, and since glutamate receptors control how many cells get invited to the meeting, they control how much brain activity is occurring. And so what I really want to know is how this reduction in glutamate receptors due to loss of this PSEN2 protein is leading to seizures. And once we know the answer to that question, we can design some new medications that can better treat seizures in those with Alzheimer's disease, so that we can address some of these cognitive symptoms and slow the progression of the disease. And hopefully these medications won't have as many side effects as our current anti-seizure medications. So with that, I'd really like to thank my lab for helping me out with all of this, as well as our funding sources from the NIH. Thank you.